Good morning, Martin. Nice to see you today.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Listen.Better podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the business of love. It's very apt for Valentine's Day. But of course, business of love in the context of business as opposed to our personal lives, although that might be interesting. But first of all, I should properly introduce you. So Martin, you are a leadership and business development coach, servicing the SMEs in the south of England, but have had an illustrious career, I understand. So do you want to just give me a few minutes biog and also a little bit about your book, Jet Engine, I understand?
I would love to, yes. I mean, for me, the fascinating thing was starting my career in product design, which is all about taking complex things and making them simple and easy to use. And what I loved there was the whole creative process of really questioning and understanding the problems you were trying to solve and then coming up with creative solutions, synthesizing many conflicting elements and trying to have something that was usable. So my first career was all about that, working in central London with top design agencies. But I got hooked by psychology, personal development, people development, and morphed. I'll spare you the story, how I ended up morphing into working for a leadership consultancy in central London, Gildab Associates, helping design, develop and research our leadership training material. And we had top media clients such as the BBC, Saatchi and Saatchi. I personally worked with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So we had, big important clients. I then decided to move and base myself more fully on the South Coast. And having got involved in the leadership development, I found with the SMEs and the smaller businesses, they really needed the business coaching up front to set the strategy, set the direction, whereas the larger companies, that tended to be in place. There were established methods. And what I found working with the smaller businesses was there was a journey they were on as they grew and developed. And many of them didn't anticipate that journey. And so by spotting those common elements that would evolve as they grew, I realized I could save them many, many years of mistakes and learning by sort of plotting that, turning it into a metaphor. And that's what I've created as the business jet engine.
Very good. Hold steady. I'll plug that book for you.
There we go.
Okay, so tell me about that analogy.
So the challenge for many businesses is they're bombarded by advice, all the things to fix, change, or improve, and they can end up trying to change far too many things at once, which leads to sort of uncertainty, confusion, burnout, demotivation, or they kind of get stalled, rabbit in the headlights and change nothing. So the metaphor, which shows these 17 parts, you've got kind of the heart of the jet engine. That's your product, your customer service, your operations. That's what most people understand when they start a business. They've got some basics to get right. But then they realize they've got to get business in. That's like getting air in the engine. That's the whole sales and marketing cycle. And then you have to get the fuel right. That's the finances. You've got to get the air to fuel mix. So the engine's burning properly. But there's no point just having an engine roaring away. You want to go somewhere, so you need the wing, and that's the people side of the business, and that takes leadership, people development to get that right. And if you don't have control of your wing and your rudder, your plane's going to go all over the place.
Okay, I see.
So you get your plane up in the air,
yeah.
But then of course you've got to have a captain in the cockpit with his dials and controls. That's about your plans and your KPIs, your measurements, your targets. And so by showing people these 17 parts, they can identify where they're weak or strong and really see their business as a system, and then identify those really important 1, 2 or 3 things. If you fix them this year, improve them, that would really make the biggest difference. So year on year, it's a rinse and repeat that has just been so well received. I turned it into a book and an online product, so fantastic. I could get a wider audience. Yeah,
I was reading one of your many testimonials on your website, and in fact that it was crystallized by someone saying that your interventions forced them to actually work on the business rather than in the business, and they had a 5-fold increase over 3 years in their turnover. So impressive stuff. But I want to get into the meat of what we're on the call for today. And apologies for my cat wandering in. He does like to make an appearance when I'm filming. And thanks for concentrating as he wandered in. So yeah, the topic of love, we discussed this in the run up to the call. Let's start off with the definition of what is love and why is it so important, especially right now?
Okay, well, I think we also need to start with why it's so misunderstood. And as humans, we get so muddied by other less positive concepts that get entwined, entangled in love, such as neediness, control, want, desire, infatuation, lust. All these things get muddled in with that word, which have kind of devalued it. And so I want to start by trying to look at love in its purest form. And that will help us think far more clearly about why it's so important, especially now. So the way I try and think about love is there are two main forces in life. There's the life-creating force, the life force. Everything is either procreating, creating, growing, or it is depleting, dying, decaying, the death force. So there's the life force and the death force. So if we think of love as life-giving energy, if we love someone, we want them to be more alive, to have a richer, fuller experience of being alive. So it's a nourishing energy as opposed to a depleting or controlling or diminishing energy. So that's how I like to think of love, as a life-giving force, a life-giving energy. When we love someone, we want the very best for them to have more life. Now, of course, the conflict or the confusion comes for humans because when our needs conflict, we want them to have more life, but in a way it interferes with ours. And that's a whole additional topic.
Interesting. So how do you relate that to business, on the basis this is a business context podcast?
Yes.
Where does love fit with business?
Well, I think increasingly, if we look at the wider context, we're in a world currently that is probably in more chaos than we've seen in a long time, unprecedented times. There's a lot of mistrust, a lot of misinformation, a lot of divisiveness. A lot of people are feeling alienated, disconnected, hopeless, confused. And we're equally a counterforce, having more cries for inclusion, for being appreciated, for having to connect, wanting to connect. And I think the world is shifting generally from the also very masculine concepts of competing, of winning, of power and control, to we're having a more feminine shift in many, many respects. And when I say masculine and feminine, I'm talking about those energies, not men and women, because we have both energies within us. But we're seeing people needing and wanting to have more purpose, to feel more connected, to feel like they can trust again. We are yearning, craving these experiences. And that life-giving energy, wanting the best for our customers, wanting the best for our staff, wanting the best relationships with our suppliers, where we really start to compete rather cooperate rather than compete, collaborate rather than just winner takes all. I think we're seeing more and more businesses are recognizing the value, the power of not just paying lip service to these things, but actually they are the winning formula going forward. And I think these are going to be big themes of the next decade. And the more clearly we realize love is central to all of this, I think the more we can embrace it, the more we can benefit from understanding it.
There's some great key words there. So purpose and connection absolutely resonate. And I suppose I'd also add in kindness, which seems to be a word that's been used a lot around the pandemic, and how people have treated each other, from neighbours through to how we treat the NHS workers and postal workers and delivery people. So if I'm being really honest, for some business leaders, talking about the word love in a business context, it's slightly icky and uncomfortable, and
absolutely
so far removed from how they might present themselves in their business environment. How do we bring that concept in to help create that competitive advantage, if you will, and to ultimately affect bottom line or the cohesiveness of the organization?
And I would agree with you. I'd say some business people are terrified of the word. It is too soft. It has too many other connotations that make it difficult. And it may be we need to find a more businessy version of the word. But I always think by thinking clearly, by taking sort of the lowest common denominator, it helps you work with those variations. So maybe we talk about nourishing relationships. I don't know. We may need to find, like we have with words like mindfulness that have become very accepted for being present. We may need to find those variations so it's a palatable word. But I think those that can embrace the concept, even if they have to use different words for it, are really going to see the benefits of the power of loyal, trusting relationships, which is what we create when we truly care about someone else's future and wanting them to have a richer experience by their relationship with us.
Yeah. And that comes from the top down, I guess. The leadership style is so important in creating how we treat each other around here. And then that has a knock-on effect of how our people then treat our clients or customers. So have you seen leadership styles evolving through the work that you do with leaders? Have you seen the good, the bad and the ugly?
Absolutely. I think we're all seeing people are having to listen much more carefully. They're having to have much richer dialogues. And the thing is, dialogue is such a challenging and mature thing to achieve. You so often have to suspend your own emotional state, your own anxieties, your own fears, to really listen to another person. And you know, going back to my design days, you can't solve something unless you really understand the problem. And so if there are relationship issues, to get the best from your staff, to get the best from your team, to empower them, to really deliver value to your customers, you have to listen. And you have to be prepared to suspend the things that make you uncomfortable and really go deeper into the things they would like that may seem at first to conflict with what you want to do. But there's the beauty of design, that so often you find it's not just an either or compromise. That you can both win. You can synthesize two what seem initially conflicting approaches to get something that actually works for everybody, by design, by creativity, by the life force.
It's absolute music to my ears, of course, listening. That's what we're all about at Q&R. But
yes, absolutely.
For me, the words that you used really resonated were suspending judgment, so that when you're talking to one of your team, a manager, upwards or downwards, escalating or managing, it's about really putting your own agenda on hold and really opening your mind to what's really being said, what's the feeling behind those words, what's driving that, what aren't they saying. And often non-verbal cues give that message loud and clear.
So all these things, we've kind of laid the paving stones with sort of emotional intelligence, but I don't believe most leaders have really taken it to the level they need to be able to work emotionally when they are hijacked, when they get scared by what they're hearing. You know, it takes huge degrees of training to develop those skills to really be able to suspend how you're feeling. And I think we've paid lip service. I think in the next decade, we're going to have to go so much deeper, but the rewards will be there, because in the end, until we fully understand what's triggering us, how we're responding, how we're feeling, we never really understand what's happening in another. Self-awareness, developing that really helps us empathize more fully, and therefore we understand the other person more fully.
And yet often, and I've been in business decades, it's something that people are left to their own devices to solve themselves. So personal development, attending therapy, counselling, working through challenging circumstances that you might have had. It's very much one's own choice to have that personal development. It's not something generally that businesses would invest in. So
not properly.
If this was being listened to by a leader who's thinking, okay, this is opening up a new way of thinking, which I'm hoping it does, what baby steps could they take? What would you advise for any level, I guess, any manager, senior leader, to take in order to bring more love into how they conduct themselves in their business lives?
Well, I think, as you say, like therapy, the executive coaching, leadership coaching, when it's done one-to-one, you can really explore deeply what goes on for you, what others bring up for you, what you're feeling. And as you start to understand what's happening within yourself with that close guidance. So it is like therapy in business. It is learning those emotional phrases that are happening within you. As you understand those, you understand others more fully. And you also learn to work with those difficult emotions. And therefore you can stay present to someone else when they're saying something difficult. So I think it is much more about one-to-one executive coaching. You can hear these things theoretically, and I do quite deep personal work with people out of the leadership work that I do. You can hear it all, you can get it straight in your head, but unless you go inside and work with the emotions, truly work with your emotions, you don't learn to be able to find peace whilst you have a conflict at the same time. You can't suspend those emotions. You're going to struggle ever to fully listen. And therefore, if you can't listen and you can't calmly explain so someone else doesn't get hijacked by what you're saying. You can't have these transformational dialogues at every level in your own organization or with a client who may be unhappy.
I'm just conscious, I'm thinking of my next question, which isn't listening better. So I'm really trying to just slow down my racing thoughts because there's so much I want to ask you, but I am really hearing what you're saying. But I do have two questions. One is, what happens when you meet an edge with somebody which takes them into territory which perhaps you might not be trained for as a coach? Do you know where that deep personal work starts and ends from keeping it in the business context, but then perhaps revealing stuff that perhaps needs a different approach or support? Do you draw that line?
Personally, I have learned how to go pretty much anywhere. Because I kept finding I was meeting that edge and would then go and research and look for the right therapist or counselor or approach. And by exploring all those different approaches, because of the way I sort of synthesize complex ideas and find how to do them quickly and simply, I kind of personally learned to keep expanding that edge that I would meet. But I think for any sort of executive coach, leadership coach, it's part of the profession is to know that boundary and to have the resources around you to know when to pass someone on or make a recommendation or suggestion. And I certainly, I still know the areas I can't go into where another approach may be far more effective. So I'm always trying to stay abreast of other people in my network that are part of my team.
Yeah, okay. And then another thing I'd like to bring it to life and put some flesh on the bones, if you will. Would you be able to talk through, and this is a bit mean because I didn't ask you to prepare this, but just a case study without obviously revealing any names, anonymizing it and maybe blurring some of the facts, but just a case study of where you've worked with someone, they've not met their edge, but they've realized what triggers them and how they've then evolved and changed and what impact that had on their leadership style and perhaps the business ultimately.
Off the top of my head, I've got to run through who's there, how much I can reveal. In many ways to date, I would say so often what's happened is their personal lives have raised the conflict inside them more fully. That's typically when their own love lives, their personal relationships go adrift, that we have then paused the leadership work or carried on with that, but then very clearly ran a separate process to work with their personal relationships. And that's why I've learned to work increasingly on the deeper, more personal aspects. But what then happens as they go through that very different process is they do then bring that back into the workplace. They have greater empathy, greater awareness. They spot more easily when one of their colleagues isn't quite right, because they've recognized more clearly in themselves. I mean, particularly as guys, I grew up with big boys don't cry, be a brave soldier, don't show any emotion. I learned not to feel anything. I learned to feel what I thought I should feel. Oh, I'm a bit concerned. I'm a little bit miffed. And then I started to realize my fists were clenched, my brow was furrowed, my jaw was tight. I was flipping angry. And I learned to be more honest with myself. And then I started to spot those clues in other people because I'd started to do my own work. So currently, I would say I see much more. It's people's personal lives trigger that real need to go deeper. They tend not to want to just because they've got a colleague they're upset with. But then they bring back that richer knowledge of themselves and become better leaders, more empathic leaders, because they've done that work.
I think this is really interesting and so salient with a lot of people now working from home. Are leaders able to pick up those cues because we put on our best face when we come to Zoom or Teams or Skype? So those little moments walking down the corridor when someone's shoulders might be dropped or their jaw might be clenched, we won't be seeing as much. So I'm really interested in the impact of how we keep that sense of looking out for others, using our empathy to spot the clues. And I think that's another whole podcast we could look at. But thank you for shedding light on that. And I think one big takeout from this, I hope people get, is that if we do the work on ourselves, we have much more ability to empathize and understand others. Having had depression in my 20s, I can generally spot someone that's going through the mill. So I completely completely get that.
But isn't that part of that big shift we've got now, this increasing blur between the personal and the business worlds? And that's why I think part of this next decade and this whole conversation around love, these more personal things matter. You know, business is to serve our lives. We want our team members to live richer lives. They're spending more time at work than anywhere else, even if it's now from home.
Yeah.
You know, that work has to be rewarding, fulfilling, purposeful, meaningful. And the more we love them, the more we nourish them, the more we help them live a richer life, the more loyal they will be to us, the more they will care about how things are for us.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling virtuous circle, isn't it? Happy team. We used to say long ago, happy team, happy client, and it creates that that wheel.
If you look at the change in world leadership, you know, and the rise of more female leaders, you know, this shift from the very mission-based, very compete, command, control, you know, typically these women leaders will be bringing more feminine energy gradually and increasingly into how they lead. You know,
Yeah.
I think we're going to see these issues just become so much more accepted, prevalent, and those that get ahead with this, you know, really have that bit of edge.
Gosh, there's so much more we could cover, but I'm in the interest of keeping it brief. Thank you so much for your time today, Martin, and wishing you a very happy Valentine's Day. And
thank you.
May your day be filled with love, and
thank you.
Clients too. And thanks very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.